He was a father, a husband, a man who hosted backyard barbecues and waved to his neighbors every Sunday morning. But behind the calm smile and the suburban quiet, there lived a monster. He didn't kill for pleasure. He didn't kill for passion. He killed because it was business, and because he could. This is the story of Richard Kuklinski, the Iceman. Born in Jersey City in 1935, Kuklinski's life began in the shadows. He grew up in a house filled with violence. His father was a brutal alcoholic, his mother cold and devout, wielding religion like a weapon. As a child, Richard learned two things early: pain and silence. When beatings became routine, he stopped crying. When humiliation became daily, he stopped reacting. And slowly, that absence of emotion became his armor. By the time he was a teenager, he was already experimenting with cruelty, lashing out at neighborhood bullies, animals, anyone who looked at him the wrong way. He wasn't driven by rage, but by control. It was the first hint of what he would later become. A man who measured his worth not by love or success, but by how completely he could dominate another life. In his early 20s, Kuklinski drifted into petty crime, theft, smuggling, street fights that ended in blood. But unlike others, he never bragged. He preferred quiet efficiency. It wasn't long before local gangsters noticed him and the way he could hurt people without flinching. A reputation began to form. If you wanted someone gone, Richard would make it happen. By the 1960s, Kuklinski had graduated from street enforcer to contract killer. He started working with the DeMeo crew, a brutal faction of the Gambino crime family. To them, Kuklinski was the perfect ghost. Anonymous, reliable, emotionless, he could shoot, stab, poison, and then go home to dinner with his wife and kids like nothing happened. He had built a life in the suburbs of Dumont, New Jersey. His neighbors saw a quiet man who adored his family. His wife, Barbara, believed he worked in film distribution, a cover story that explained his erratic hours and secretive phone calls. On the surface, he was living the American dream: a big house, new cars, 3 children. But beneath that illusion, his other world thrived, a world of money, violence, and fear. He became known for his adaptability. If a gun jammed, he'd use a knife. If a knife wasn't available, he'd use his hands. His calm under pressure was inhuman, as if emotion itself had been switched off. This cold efficiency earned him his infamous name, the Iceman. The nickname came from his method, freezing his victims to disguise the time of death. A trick that left investigators chasing ghosts. But the name also described him perfectly. He was unfeeling, detached, frozen inside. He once said he was not a serial killer. He called himself a businessman. To him, murder was a transaction, a problem solved, a service rendered. He prided himself on keeping emotions out of it. No pleasure, no regret, no second thoughts. But deep down, that detachment was an illusion. In moments of anger, the mask slipped. And when it did, the results were horrific. He claimed to have killed over 100 men. Though investigators could confirm only a fraction of that number, he didn't care about accuracy. For him, exaggeration was just another way to keep people afraid. Despite the chaos of his second life, he remained devoted to his family. In his own distorted way, he never wanted his wife or children to know what he did, though his temper at home was volatile. Barbara would later describe the fear that filled their house, how one wrong word could send him into silent, simmering fury. To the outside world, he was quiet. To his family, he was unpredictable. Yet even that fear couldn't erase their confusion when the truth came out years later. How could a man so affectionate with his daughters also be capable of such unimaginable cruelty? That contradiction became the very essence of Richard Kuklinski, a man who lived between two worlds, never fully belonging to either. During the 1970s and early 1980s, Kuklinski reached his peak. He was making tens of thousands of dollars per job, killing on behalf of mob families across New York and New Jersey. He had friends in every shadow: smugglers, thieves, killers, and enemies just as dangerous. He didn't drink, didn't use drugs, and didn't gamble. Control was everything to him. Control over his emotions, his image, his victims. He treated murder as a craft, precise, efficient, almost artistic. To him, each killing was proof of his discipline. He once said the only mistake a killer could make was to care. And for years, he didn't. But beneath that ice, cracks were forming. The mob was changing. New leadership, tighter scrutiny, and law enforcement closing in on organized crime. And Kuklinski's anonymity was starting to fade. He was becoming careless, overconfident, believing he could outsmart anyone, even the FBI. Around this time, an undercover agent named Dominic Polifrone entered the picture. Polifrone was patient, strategic, and fearless. He studied Kuklinski's habits, his ego, his need to be seen as untouchable. And slowly, he began to move closer, posing as a buyer in the criminal underworld, earning the Iceman's trust. As the walls closed in, Kuklinski didn't see it coming. He thought he was negotiating another job, another deal. In reality, he was walking straight into a trap. By the mid-1980s, Richard Kuklinski believed he was untouchable. He had spent decades killing for the Mafia, eliminating rivals and cleaning up problems no one else could handle. He had money, power, and the confidence of a man who thought the law would never catch up. But what he didn't know was that the law was already inside his circle. Dominic Polifrone had spent months gaining Kuklinski's trust, posing as a hitman looking for cyanide, one of the Iceman's preferred methods. Their conversations were calm, casual, businesslike. Kuklinski spoke about murder the way most people talk about grocery lists: methodical, detached, precise. He believed he was teaching a fellow professional, but every word was being recorded. On December 17, 1986, the trap closed. Kuklinski met with Polifrone to finalize a deal, unaware that a SWAT team was waiting nearby. As he returned to his car, the command came through. In seconds, police surrounded him, weapons drawn, shouting for him to get down. For the first time in decades, Richard Kuklinski was out of control. And that loss of control, the one thing he couldn't tolerate, finally broke the illusion. His arrest sent shockwaves through his quiet neighborhood. The friendly man next door, the one who shoveled snow for elderly neighbors, who doted on his daughters, was now being called the Iceman killer. News cameras swarmed his street. His family hid from the headlines. And behind the bars of his cell, Kuklinski began to realize that the double life he'd so carefully maintained had finally collided. During interrogations, he remained calm. He spoke softly, as if discussing someone else's crimes. Investigators noted how he seemed almost relieved, as though the performance was finally over. When asked how he could live with himself, he simply said, "It's just what I had to do. You can't have feelings in this business." He showed no remorse, no visible guilt. But psychologists who studied him saw something else, not pure evil, but profound emptiness. Kuklinski's calm wasn't strength, it was absence. He had spent a lifetime building walls so high that nothing, not love, not fear, not even regret, could reach him. It wasn't courage that made him the Iceman. It was disconnection. During his trial, prosecutors laid out decades of hidden crimes. The evidence was overwhelming: testimony, tapes, and Kuklinski's own words. In 1988, he was convicted of multiple murders and sentenced to life in prison. As he was led away, he didn't flinch, didn't look back at his family. He simply nodded, as if acknowledging that his story, finally, had an ending. Inside prison, Richard Kuklinski became something else. A case study documentary filmmakers, psychologists, and law enforcement experts came to see him, to understand what made the Iceman so unique. He spoke freely, almost proudly, about the things he'd done. He wasn't trying to shock anyone. He was trying to be understood. To him, the interviews were therapy, a stage where he could finally control the story. But even in those moments, there was something deeply unsettling. When asked if he felt remorse, he said, "Regret? No. It happened. It's over. I can't change it." He viewed his crimes like entries in a ledger, numbers on a page, detached from morality. And yet, when he spoke about his wife and children, his tone softened. He claimed he loved them, truly loved them. But that love never changed who he was. It was the perfect paradox: a man capable of love, but incapable of empathy. He once admitted that the only time he cried in prison was after watching The Passion of the Christ. Not for his victims, but for himself. He said it made him realize that he'd spent his whole life on the wrong side of pain. Richard Kuklinski died in 2006 at the age of 70 while serving multiple life sentences. To the end, he remained a mystery, part monster, part man. Some believed he exaggerated his body count, inflating his legend to maintain control even behind bars. Others believed every word, convinced that the Iceman's reach went further than anyone ever knew. But one truth remains undeniable. He was a man who lived two lives, one in the light, one in absolute darkness, and somewhere between the two, he lost the ability to tell them apart. He once said, "If I had to do it again, I'd probably do it the same way. It's who I am." Those words still haunt everyone who's heard them, because they reveal something deeper than evil. They reveal the terrifying possibility that some people aren't born monsters. They simply stop being human. Richard Kuklinski wasn't a villain in the cinematic sense. He wasn't driven by revenge or ideology. He was a reflection of control, of survival, of what happens when trauma hardens into something colder than fear. He reminds us that monsters rarely hide in the shadows. They live among us. They smile, they wave, they tuck their children into bed, and sometimes they never stop killing inside their heads. Richard Kuklinski, the Iceman, a man who froze his victims to erase time and froze his soul to survive his own. His story isn't just about murder. It's about identity. How a child who learned silence became a man who spoke only in death. He forced the world to ask one question that still lingers in every corner of true crime. Can evil exist without emotion? Or is emotion itself what makes us human? If you found this story as haunting as we did, like the video, share it with someone who thinks they know what evil looks like, and subscribe to Crime Fior for more stories from the shadows of power.